The final chapter of this particular tale is now upon us. For all her many prevarications, Miss Monday's signal has led us here. We know from her recordings that this stockpile exercises an influence over the xenotechnology that is overtaking her very body, and this confirms our worst fears. Siblings of the Haqqislam Baram, make no mistake. No imperial, corporate, or colonial power can be allowed to exert control over Shinju's very atmosphere. However foolish, vainglorious, or enthusiastically inebriated the local populace might be, a sword of Damocles wielded by a distant and self-interested overlord is incompatible with their personal search for knowledge. The distant and historic predecessor of a modern recreation once wrote that all warfare is based on deception. Less distant and more recent is the following idea, that to truly deceive an adversary, you must show them precisely what they expect to see. When employing light forces, we have supported with heavy reinforcement. When near, we have appeared distant, and when distant, we have appeared near. These labors now bear fruit. We are closing in on the lair. Since the disastrous raid on the Khazaraibu, every effort has been turned to this outcome. Salah al-Din will lead this final push, but Operative Sharif has immediate tactical authority. She will succeed. In this, I have faith. Yes, it's time to wrap up the Monday signal with the final mission. The Megabeast sleeps tonight. We're going to talk about the scenario itself, the game that was played, and then end the video with some thoughts about how the campaign has gone. Things I thought were really interesting, things I thought were done well, positive takeaways, but then also some lessons learned that are drawn from my own observations, but might be interesting for people interested in doing something like this themselves locally in future. But first, and lest I forget, an announcement I'm very happy to make is congratulations to Stephen W. from Mettingen in Germany for being the winner of this channel's Mazebreaker bundle giveaway. Every channel was asked to nominate one random number which corresponded with someone who played their mission, and of over 300 players who played Ghost in the feed, Stefan, your number came up. I hope you enjoyed the scenario, and if they haven't already, Corvus Belli will reach out to you to arrange getting you your copy of Operation Mazebreaker. And with that announcement happily made, let's talk about the final game in the Ruby Monday signal, starting with the scenario. Now, this scenario does something that I think is probably sensible if you're looking to do narrative scenarios yourself, which is to at least start with a hook that's going to be familiar with players. This mission is, in many respects, provisioning, but with a bunch of extra steps and spice. Now, there are, of course, a lot of differences, but if you start by thinking of it that way, it helps the scenario click together. Now, unlike provisioning, there aren't 3 different objectives that we're trying to steal supplies from, but there is one central objective. We extract things from that central objective and we carry them back to an extraction zone in a way that is intended, I think, to produce a play pattern at least somewhat similar to provisioning. That means that there are 3 pieces of Xenotech in the central Megabeast lair. You extract them by making a willpower roll. Most models can carry only 1 piece of Xenotech at a time, and you're looking to bring that Xenotech back to an extraction zone that you place before the beginning of the game. Simple enough, of course, it's the narrative mechanics that make this really complicated. The Megabeast lair itself and the campaign or scenario writers did encourage you to use a model for a Megabeast if you had one. I had something in mind, but I couldn't physically transport it to the game store. And in those cases, you use a regular circular template, and it's just treated as an eclipse zone infinitely tall. A model that gets to base contact with the eclipse zone makes a willpower roll to extract the Xenotech. However, this is a Megabeast lair. The Megabeast begins the game sleeping, but if it wakes up, it will start to ARO. It has a very strong dodge against anything from outside of its zone of control, and it will respond with a CC-22 Burst 2 Damage Lots double action CC weapon against anything that activates inside its zone of control. Stealth and cautious moves are effective in stopping those AROs, but not if you're carrying Xenotech. Now, I said the Megabeast begins the game sleeping. What can wake it up? It will wake up if it is shot, and it will wake up if a model attempts to extract a Xenotech. Whether or not they pass or fail, they also have to make a Fizz roll to see if the Megabeast wakes up. If they fail, the Megabeast wakes up and will start to ARO. Regardless of whether the Megabeast is awake or not, you attempt to get those Xenotech out from under the Megabeast. You attempt to bring them back to the extraction zone, drop them off in the extraction zone in the same way as happens in provisioning, and points are as follows. 1 point for being a person who actually extracts the Xenotech in the first place, 1 point for each piece of Xenotech that you control at the end of the game, and then potentially 4 points up for grabs for controlling more Xenotech than the opponent. That's 2 points. 1 point for having a Xenotech in your extraction area, and 1 point if you get more weapons or items from a supply cache than the adversary. What does the supply cache do? Well, you can put the Megabeast back to sleep. You place a supply cache, it acts as effectively a panoply. Models can make a willpower roll, unless they have booty, in which case they succeed automatically to pull something out of the panoply, and they can choose to pull out a weapon that can put the Megabeast back to sleep. If it hits it, we'll put it back to sleep, or you can just make a normal booty roll if you think you don't need one of those. Deployment is something of a hybrid of Power Pack and Biotech 4, which is to say it's at least better than Power Pack, but still very advantaged for the first player. There are still those launching points for an assault that the person going first can use because they have those little points 16 inches up the board that they can put aggressive models in, whereas the defending player has limited ability to make use of that space because it's most exposed to the adversary, and they are trying to deploy in what effectively amounts to a Biotech 4 zone. I would go first in this game, and my opponent would make the comment that it pretty much felt like I, as the aggressor, got to deploy using Power Pack deployment to my advantage, and they had to deploy like it was Biotech 4. I'll take that over Power Pack, but we're still dealing with some fairly hostile deployment situations here, but at least able to make lots of use of forward deployment and infiltration and combat jump, etc., to play to the rest of the board. There is an exclusion zone, but it's just an 8-inch circle around the Megabeast. Now, there are a couple of ways to exploit this scenario, including one really bad one that we'll talk about during the battle report that I kind of stumbled across mostly by accident at the beginning of my second turn, thinking about how I might approach that turn. This actually strays into the just don't do that, it will make the game unfun for your opponent. And exploitable mechanics are just one of those foibles of scenarios that are very heavily designed toward a narrative. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit in lessons learned, at least for me, about this campaign at the end of the video. Setting that aside, though, we are going to build a list to play this scenario very aggressively, something you do in a narrative, and we have some very specific plans that we're going to be looking to pursue, including one that has actually been a few months in the making. Now, that might sound like kind of a weird statement, because this narrative campaign, at least openly, hasn't been that long in the making. And yes, this was more of an accident, but it's something I decided I would seize upon for this particular game because I knew who I was going to be playing against. I had a game lined up with my good friend Ed, normally a Toha player, today experimenting with O12. And to explain what we're doing with this list, let me first give you a little bit of backstory. I've had many games with Ed over the last few months, and I've happened to play Haqqislam in quite a few of those. And basically every single game for the last 3 months now that we've had where I've played Haqqislam, go through, you talk about public and private information at the beginning of the game, I note what is in the middle of the table, what's under camouflage, what's mimetism 3, what's mimetism 0. I point out mimetism 0 things, and Ed will almost always say, okay, so that's a Delamy. And, as a matter of genuine truthfulness, I will respond with, well, yes, it's probably a Delamy, but for the sake of being open about things in my faction, it could also be a Sundukbut that is declining to use decoy. And these games reached a point where I had said that so many times, it became a recurring in-joke, where any Mimetism 0 camouflage marker that I deploy now could be a Sundukbut declining to use decoy. So it's time to have a Sundukbut and decline to use decoy. I didn't mean to set this as a trap, but it occurred to me as I was list writing, and I thought it would be too interesting not to do. So, what are we doing? We're running a Sundukbut list. Most of this otherwise will be in a pretty standard Haqqislam shell, but with a few things that are doing something kind of interesting. So combat group 1, and remember this is a Saladin list, so the combat groups really don't matter enormously, they all move around on the fly. Zuleika and Zamira, cool, 2 Ghazi Matawirs with Jammer. 2 is an important number, particularly in Power Pack-esque scenarios. If I end up going second, I want to have a Jammer on each of those corners, doing at least a little bit in the Power Pack-esque elements of this deployment to slow attacks against me. Then we have 3 camouflage troopers in the midfield. Hunzakut forward observer, and Hawa forward observer. I've gone with a different weapon loadout on the Hunzakut just in the off chance I might be able to use that shock mine deployable repeater profile to lay a defensive cordon. Spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. 3 camouflage models here is going to be very important to how we are going to play the turn, especially if we get to go first. We then have a Sundukbut Neurokinetics and Saladin, or if you want to pronounce it accurately, Salah Aldin. In Combat Group 2, we have a slightly weird 3-person Harry's Fire Team that does not have any Fire Team bonuses. It is purely a Fire Team of convenience. Janissary Heavy Machine Gun, Odalisk, and Layla Sharif. The Odalisk has disco balls. The Janissary is present. I don't love Janissary HMGs as an active turn gun. They are fine. They are expensive. A lot of things I find have Warhorse these days, which makes them immune to the Ballistical Attack -3. But if I wanted to be able to make the Megabeast go back to sleep, I needed the best possible option to do so in a single order, and one of the only skills that does anything to the Megabeast's very good quality dodge is BS Attack -3. The Megabeast does not have Warhorse. And so the plan for this Janissary is to probably do nothing unless it was time to try and make the Megabeast sit down again, in which case it was the best gun available in the entire faction for high ballistic till BS Attack -3, getting the Megabeast to sit back down. The Odalisk is there because Disco is very valuable, and since I've taken models that can form a duo or a Haris, I wanted Layla Sharif in this list both for narrative reasons and because she's a good, if you only have one hacker, take this hacker. So cool, there we go, 3-person Haris team that just are members of convenience. We've got a Warcore because it's a 3-point regular order with Saladin, a Yan. Now I only had 6 points for a warband in this combat group, and I've been wanting to experiment with a Yan for a while. I've taken a Yan in the second Monday Signal campaign, hoping that it would be able to, like in playtesting, hoping that it would be able to like sneak onto the board and grab a clue that my opponent didn't expect, and it ended up just not staying off the board the entire game in a way that was kind of annoying to me. So I was dedicated this game to taking it and deploying it, but just using it as a mobile Fizz 14 smoke thrower that might also do something else. And then we have a Zabek, because Zabek is very good. I like Zabek. We've got loads of smoke and a fair bit of mimetism in this list. Having an Albedo gunfighter complements that really nicely. I've got Disco just in case, but I'd also like to be able to suppress MSV AROs, and this is basically just a pretty solid Haqqislam list. One of the things really that sets it apart is it's going to make even more use than normal of coordinated orders, but spoiler alert, that's because coordinated orders are exceptionally powerful in this scenario. Now, playing against me this evening will be Ed trying out O12 with his classic Tiny Combat Group 1. And this is, by his own admission, a little bit of a pile of cards style O12 list, just trying out lots of things he wanted to try. But there's a few things in here that I really, really like. Now, 2 Moonrakers with Mine Layers. Yep, it's O12. Slap them in there, get yourself some nice regular orders with good defensive elements and mines in the midfield. They are forward deployment, I believe, but particularly easy to use that in this deployment because you can hang that 8-inch forward deployment off of the Power Pack deployment extensions. We then have a Vidok duo, Vidok Doctor, Vidok FTO with multi-sniper rifle and MSV1. This is an interesting fire team because it's not something I ever really thought about. I have used Vidoks previously as force multipliers for other guns. But actually, this is a very clean duo. There's nothing wrong with this as a fire team at all, and it makes very good use of the 2 combat group spaces. We then got 2 Varangians because good quality smoke is very useful, and they give you a nice thing to spend orders on in this combat group. So cool, some interesting ideas at play already. Moonrakers aren't revolutionary, but they're just fucking sensible, and Ed is nothing if not a sensible player. In combat group 2, we begin with a Gamma Lieutenant. Yep, wonderful choice. Love me the Gamma. There'll be some chain of command for it as well, so it can be used nice and freely. And then we have something that I had never thought about in O12, but which in retrospect I should absolutely include in lists, which is an Omega heavy machine gun and then an Oko tactical awareness flash pole, a forward observer remote. I didn't even realize, I probably should have. I knew intellectually that you could take Okos and link them in O12, but just because of like Starmada Brain, where I'm used to thinking of Okos as something that links with robots and has pure duo bonuses, didn't even really cross my mind that no, actually what you can do here is exactly what you can do in a faction like Kestrel Colonial Force, where you link a very high quality gun like a Hetkari with a Pathfinder John bot for tactical awareness and all of the utility of the sensor bot, and a specialist that moves up the field with the gunfighter. And Omega is very, very equivalent to that kind of weapon. It's a ballistic skill 14, good quality heavy infantry, mimetism 6. It's a fantastic gunfighting piece that we often kind of don't take very much, or which I don't see very much in O12, because all it is a gunfighting piece. But it does not need link bonuses, and an Oko complements it really well. In fact, you could also link the Oko with the Gamma, because that's a fair combat group. You can take two duos, so why not just have an Oko stakeable to the Gamma for a single tactical awareness order at some point, and then the Gamma can, or like if it doesn't spend its lieutenant order, you have NCOs in the other combat group. That's just convenient and does all of the same stuff. I don't know why I wasn't thinking about this in O12, but Ed did, and I really like this as a duo. We've got a Roadbot Paramedic with Sidebot. This is kind of a I had 4 points spare, but sure, you had 4 points spare, and the Sidebot is excellent. A Kappa Hacker, just to make the repeaters in this army, live, make the Sujan, make the vehicles respect like really deep intrusions. The Kappa would be very heavily defended. It would just stay way at the back of the table. It would exist mostly just to turn the repeaters on. We've got a Ment with Chain of Command, of course, as very cheap insurance against the Gamma going down, a Flash Pulse Remote, and then a Sasha. The Sasha is very useful in this combat group. I think she's actually going to end up getting swapped into combat group 1 during the game, because she's going to be the person who has the primary responsibility for making the Megabeast go back to sleep. She auto-succeeds on her rolls to pull things from the booty panoply, so she'll just always get the go the fuck to sleep gun in one order, and then we'll just shoot the Megabeast until it sits down, reloading if she needs to. There is also, notice that's 14 troops, 276 points. There is also something off the field. Ed likes himself an infiltrator or a combat jump trooper, uses those in equal amounts. I wouldn't know what it was. We'll reveal it over the course of the game. People have said that's something that they find interesting. Technically, if I was going to go full private information, I could also have hidden the 2 Moonrakers, but 2 sets of 2 camouflage markers in an O12 list outside the deployment zone is almost always going to be just one thing, so I figured I would leave them up there on the army list. Overall, this is like a good quality generic army. You could use this in any scenario and expect to do reasonably well with it, and I kind of want to play some O12 now, doing something like Gamma Lieutenant with Oko Friend, Omega with Oko Friend. They are AVA2 in O12, so hell, I think I'm going to give that a shot at some point. So, this is the O12 that we'll be playing against. Let's take a look at how the game went. This is the table that we'll be playing on. We have the Megabeast lair here in the center. I win the lieutenant role and I snap pick going first. I have a very specific plan for if I go first in this scenario, and I intend to make use of it. Ed ums and ahs a little bit about deployment zones, but because as the second player you effectively have to deal with Biotech 4 style deployment, he elects to deploy on the right side of the table. So Ed will be deploying in approximately this space, and I will be deploying in approximately this space, with me going first. I've got 2 reserves. They're going to be Zamira and the Zabek, which you can see hanging out down here. Ed's reserve is going to be the Gamma. Now, even though I'm going first, I still want those Jammer Matawiya to be occupying those defensive positions. So we've got a Jammer Matawiya here that can impetuous forward into this nook, and we've got another Jammer Matawiya here that could impetuous up and around. It'll basically just stay where it is. It's projecting a Jammer zone against anything that tries to intrude into my deployment zones this way. Salah al-Din is hanging out back behind this tree and crate. We have the Janissary behind this building here. My extraction zone is here with the bloody, it's not called a panoply, but with the panoply just next to it, with the hope that if I need to, I can poke up and around and grab the treasure. Now, I've done something a little bit silly here, which if you play this, you may want to be careful about. I've put the little treasure thing just outside of the extraction zone. It is dangerously close to within 8 inches of the Megabeast. It's not quite. I can approach it and nick things from it, but I think I should probably have had it further back. It has to be more than 4 inches outside of my deployment zone, but there's still ample space, and to my knowledge, you can have it inside an extraction zone. I don't see why you couldn't. So I should have had it a little bit closer, so it's just a bit easier to walk past, but won't be the end of the world. Layla Sharif and the Odalisk are hanging out back here behind this crate, which is a vulnerability, having them together and easy to kill, that I'll just barely manage to avoid being exploited. We've got the Warcore hanging out over here behind this building. The Zabek and Zamira will, of course, reserve drop down here. And then we have 4 camouflage markers. So in and around this area, all of them 8 inches from the Megabeast, we have 3 different Mimetism 3 camouflage markers, which are, of course, the 2 Hunzukuts and the Al-Hawa. They're as close as I can make them to the Megabeast. You don't have to do the strategy I'm going to do at the beginning of this turn. You don't have to have them exactly within 8, but as close as possible does help. And then we have a Mimetism 0 camouflage marker here. It is just outside, it's within 8 inches of the power pack deployment, which does allow it to be deployed basically. It's just about on the central line there. just very slightly back, looking for all the world like a Delamy with a Panzerfaust, which indeed that would be a good location for a Delamy with a Panzerfaust. A little bit of line of sight back into my deployment, but then a lot of line of sight forward up in this direction. For Ed's deployment, he has his Moonraker here and a second one here. His treasure is hanging out behind this building with the Sasha very close to it. His extraction zone is here. We couldn't find anything in the rules that prevent you from deploying inside an extraction zone, so the Moonraker mine is deployed inside the extraction zone. The Kappa Hacker is down here. The repeater, I think, is going to end up somewhere in this direction, just so that there's basically so that there is a hacking area covering both of the approaches towards the power pack, like the close prongs of the deployment, in the same way that I'm using jammers. And then the roadbot is here with its help with its roadbot friend, with its sidebot, just ready to basically ARO anything that comes down out of this building is going to be facing Riot Stopper fire. On this rooftop here, with a pretty good ARO position, we have the Vidok Sniper with its Vidok Doctor hanging out next to it. Very nice, clean ARO team, a long way back, making excellent use of distance. I am going to be able to respond to it pretty aggressively with my Zabek, but it's in a very good spot to really make a little bit of pain for me trying to push in, up, and around toward the Megabeast, and especially to attack Ed's deployment zone. The Oko Copper bot, giving tactical awareness to the Omega Trooper, is here, 8 inches away from the Omega, which is also deployed a long way back, making use of whatever depth Ed can get in order to give himself as much time as possible. What he's particularly doing here is he's mostly just a little bit worried about deploying against flyers, and so he's putting up the best cordon he can, with the note that, look, I am going to have 2 reserve drops and it's hard to deploy against everything. Because he has to face, on one hand, a Zabek, which has Albedo and Ballistical Attack -3, and on the other, he has to at least respect the risk of a Hatham, which has an MSV and Mimetism 6, he's got a good mix of tools to respond to those, but not to respond to all of them at the same time. Because he judged the Zabek as the most likely he was going to have to fight, he reserve dropped the Gamma, which is a Warhorse and very good at pinning a Zabek back. But the downside of that is that he had to not reserve drop his Vidok, which is prey for the Zabek. So the Gamma is here, and its job is basically, look, the Zabek might get a kill or two, but it won't push deeper in, and the Zabek just does not want to fight a Gamma, particularly at this very long range where it's unlikely to get in good Spitfire range. So good deployment, basically. Now, there's a few other bits and pieces scattered around. There's a flash pulse remote somewhere. The Ment agent is hanging out behind this crate, and that, assuming 2 Moonrakers, only shows 14 troopers. So I'm like, well, there's something else out there. And because it's vanilla O12, that could be anything. Ed has played some vanilla O12 in the past. I know he very much likes Lynxes. I would play a Lynx in this scenario with these deployment zones, but I have to basically respect any number of possibilities, which I do by just being like, look, when it shows up, it will show up. So, I'm going first. I have counterintelligence. Ed has many things he needs to do with his command tokens, and so he elects not to strip any orders from me. That works fine by me. I've got a lot I need to get done this turn. Now, there's going to be some Impetuous, there's going to be some moving around, there's going to be throwing some smoke, and the Zabek will start an attack run. We're going to end up with smoke by the end of the turn here and here, but I don't need that immediately. And I'll run through the offensive things that happen this turn. They didn't happen in this order, but I'll run through my offense and then my scenario play. In practice, I interwove these so that I wouldn't overspend on orders, and especially the Biker Assault is going to be just with whatever orders I had spare. But we'll begin with the Zabek. It's going to move up and around to here, it's going to scooch around, and after a couple of face-to-face rolls, put down the sidebot. It's able to engage the sidebot at just enough distance that the sidebot isn't able to get into range with the Riot Stopper. The sidebot could have scooched forward to get closer with that 10.5-inch template, but then I would have been able to engage it from out of cover. So Ed has to be reasonably content with the sidebot losing costing me a couple of orders, and then the Zabek is able to come up and around, and it's able to use Super Jump just to kind of like skirt into this position here, where it's not being seen, and just use height and everything, where it's not being seen by anything on ground level down here, not by the Omega, not by the Gamma, but it does see the Vidok. Now, the Gamma is still doing some useful things here. There was a position where I could have really aggressively pushed forward and cut this line here to catch the Vidok out of cover, which would have almost certainly just won me the face-to-face roll immediately. The Gamma and the Omega are pinching that line off, so I do have to engage the Vidok in cover and in good range for both of us. However, the Zabek is very advantaged in that fight, And while it does take a few orders, because the Vidocq is still firing 2 shots back, eventually the Vidocq goes down and in fact goes all the way to dead. That takes care of the MSV2 Overwatch. Now, if I needed to, I could have used Disco to accomplish the things that I needed to. I have a Nautilus with Disco Balls for this reason, and I can reload her thanks to the baggage. But as I don't have much, in fact, I have virtually no need to deal with putting the Megabeast back to sleep at all this turn, thanks to how I'm going to approach the turn. I'm very happy to be able to use Smoke instead. All right, cool. That's our first offensive line. Our second offensive line is going to be with spare orders from Combat Group 1. It will happen in and around everything else that is occurring, but it's going to be Zemira moving up and around this direction, triggering a mine, failing to dodge it, failing to save, going dogged. God damn it. Well, it's a thing that happens, not the end of the world. She'll actually intuitive attack out of the smoke into the other Moonraker. She'll put it down as a result, which is quite a good outcome, but she doesn't kill it. She just puts it unconscious. Because she just puts it unconscious, she can't physically fit through here in a single order because she would first contact the unconscious model, which means that she'll get killed by multiple things on the way through. So instead, she just moves out and around here, dodges around, and makes a run in this direction. And that's going to end with her getting shot by basically everything. She forces a dodge out of this Varangian guard here. He goes for the dodge because she's got 2 flamethrowers. She puts 4 breaker pistols into him and kills him as well. Now, is that the best possible use of a model like Zuleika? Look, it's totally fine. Cleared a mine and killed a couple of cheap models. Cost me a fair few orders to do it, but it's going to cost Ed regular orders every single turn. I think from his perspective, he's happy to limit the damage there. I'm not going to get any of his premium heavy infantry put down. I think the only thing he would really have liked would have been for the Vidocq to have not gone all the way to dead. That would basically have been a good defensive turn. Because the Vidocq died and couldn't be doctored back, it's less damage than he would have, it's more damage than he would have liked to have taken, but probably less than he would have feared, given Power Pack for me, Biotech 4 for him deployment style. Now, that's the offense. What about the scenario? Well, the scenario was spending Saladin's Order and almost every command token I had. I think 3 of my 5 command tokens coordinating a ton. And this is the coordinated line that I actually spoke to the creators about afterwards, and they went, oh shit, we didn't stop that from happening. Damn it. All 3 of these camouflage markers, and you can do this in provisioning, by the way. It doesn't work as well in provisioning because provisioning has the objectives spread out across the board, but provisioning does have 2 objectives in the midfield. You can use synchronized or coordinating models to make an efficient run in provisioning. So I just did the same thing here, but it's way, way better in this scenario. These 3 camouflage markers scooch out and around here, get into this smoke, hang out behind the Megabeast, and then they coordinate steal Xenotech. Now, each of them has to roll, but each of them is willpower 14. And then having rolled, each of them has to roll to see if the Megabeast wakes up, and each of them is Fizz 11. Very, very likely that Megabeast wakes up. Pretty likely that I get 2 of the 3 Xenotechs out of the Megabeast just doing this. And the plan was, if this fails, okay, I'll try and put the Megabeast back to sleep, maybe have a third go, or we'll just play it as it lies. However many I can get is how many I can get. If I'd gotten 2, I would have been fine with that. As it happened, I got all 3. Now, the Megabeast wakes up and it will start AROing from this point onwards, but don't care because I'm now going to coordinate again, and all 3 of them are going to come back around to, they're just going to move. The Megabeast can only ARO one of them. All 3 of them are going to get to the extraction zone. The 19-point Hunzukut with the mines and deployable repeaters is going to get absolutely annihilated by the Megabeast's attack, but by the end of this turn, I will have all 3 pieces of Xenotech inside this extraction zone in, frankly, a number of orders that still allowed me to do that entire Zemira attack run. Now, that's really rough for Ed for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I've immediately locked in 3 points for securing all of those, and I didn't really have to contend with the scenario at all. Yes, the Megabeast got 1 ARO, but it got 1 ARO and killed the model, and I'm willing to have that happen in exchange for 3 objective points. Having locked down 3 objective points, because I'm the one that took all 3 of those out of the Megabeast, not only is Ed at an immediate and severe scenario deficit, but now he has to get all the way across the table and make the really difficult rolls to pull these things out of this extraction zone, and I have the luxury of just defending this for the entire rest of the game. That has another knock-on effects, because this is a scenario, say it with me, it has a big active defensive mechanism, that looks like it's meant to make the scenario harder for a person trying to go for the scenario objectives, but is actually very exploitable. For the rest of the game, Ed is going to have to spend 3 or 4 orders every single turn, putting the Megabeast back to sleep, and I turned it on for free, and I'm going to spend 1 order around shooting it to wake it back up again, and he can't pass through. This zone here, he cannot pass through this zone. It is a tremendous defensive bulwark. Technically, the Megabeasts are meant to be killable, but I ran the math on them, and I have found a couple of ways where you can kill the Megabeast, but by kill the Megabeast, I mean if you invest like 15 orders with very specialized troops, which for practical purposes means don't bother trying. There is no effective way to kill the Megabeast. Getting 4 of your own other troopers and your Jimbo into close combat was the best possible way to kill the Megabeast. And even that does like 2/3 of a wound per order, and the thing has 8 wounds, and you have to set all of that up. So don't bother, don't try. It'd be fun to do as a flex. If I was going to do it as a flex, that would be how. Your next best options are to use a linked Mormaya HMG or linked Achilles or a Dragao in about that order. If you do that, make sure to spotlight with a hacker first, because +3 to hit on all of those attacks makes you very likely to at least win the face-to-face roll or crit, etc. However, personal advice in this scenario, don't bother killing the Megabeast. In fact, use it against your opponent to the maximum extent possible. So, going into Ed's first turn, to summarize the position that he's in. Had a little bit of damage that he's sustained. He is down effectively 3 troopers. That's not too bad, all things considered, but the scenario position is unenviable. I've pulled back things like the Zebek to here. I've gone into suppressive fire. I set up the best cordon that I can. I'm down 2 models. It cost me 2 models to do that damage and accomplish that scenario thing. Under normal circumstances, a first turn defensively where 2 of your opponent's models die and 3 of yours die is a very good trade, but attrition at this point puts Ed recovering that Xenotech from the extraction zone further and further out of reach. That makes this game difficult, and there are certain things that are going to happen to make it more difficult. Now, he's going to do his best here, but this is the turn that the trap will be sprung. He appraises the board, thinks about his options, and what he decides that he needs to do is set the preconditions that he can as best as possible for his advance. And he's going to start doing that by bringing down his hidden deployment model, which is a Delta Killer Hacker. Now, this is a 24-point model. It's a combat jump trooper. It's got a KHD and a combi rifle and a riot stopper, reasonably costed and quite useful. It sticks the landing on a 12 and lands just here, at which point I fucking panic because I have a suppressive fire vehicle and I have no gizmo kits in this list at all. So if that vehicle gets riot stoppered, then the only way for me to get that vehicle out of being glued is to have it just dodge until it succeeds. So like, no, that's a good thing to have land. And there are a bunch of things that can be done that are very dangerous with this Delta. It's got an attack run around here. It does have to get past the War Correspondent. The War Correspondent will be in cover relative to it. There's a little thing popping off of this building, but that's a pretty straightforward fight. And then there are a few models around here that are potentially quite open to a combi rifle, and that's sort of like, that's what Ed's going to do next. So his plan is to go on a bit of a tear with this Delta, but to start with, in order to do this sort of order efficiently, he wants to deal with, in order, the camouflage markers up here, and the suppressive fire vehicle behind this building. He wants to get to the vehicle because he will riot stopper that, and he can't engage the vehicle until he engages these things over here. And he wants to kill the Matawe anyway. Now, the plan is that the Delta is going to combat jump up here. It's going to get within 16 inches of these 2 models. And if the Dalami reveals, fine, it's got it out of cover. He'll fire all of his shots with the combi into that. Very good face-to-face roll. And the Matawe has no smoke. Its best ARO is to get away with a breaker pistol or otherwise to dodge. So this is like a nice, clean fight. Or rather, it would be a nice clean fight if this was a Dalami with a Panzerfaust. But it is not. And so the Delta jumps up to here, expecting to have 2 models inside 16 that he can fight. The Ghazi Matawiya does indeed fire with his breaker, and the Sundukbut reveals itself and puts 4 shots on 16's armor piercing with the Spitfire into the Delta. And Ed's just like, damn it. This is now a very, very bad face-to-face roll for the poor combat jump troop, and while it does kill, it just splits its burst in hope. While it does kill the Matawiya, it gets put all the way to dead by the Sundukbut, which is Okay, look, frankly, the Sundukbut costs almost twice as much as it does. In fact, I think it costs more than twice as much as it does, but that has stopped an attack run that would have been violently dangerous. Now, an option Ed had was just to not deal with this, was just to not deal with these markers and just kill probably 3 pieces, right? Layla Sharif, the Odalisk. Odalisk is difficult to kill, just a no winning cap troop, but Layla Sharif, the Odalisk, and the War Correspondent, just put them down and be happy with that. That would have been a fine turn. Going to Cybermask, huge problem for me. But because of the orders that he had access to and to do things efficiently, and because killing this Matawiya is basically essential for him to push up in this direction, which he would have to do to get the roadbot forward probably at some point during the game, he went for that first as what he thought was the easy play, and it turned out I pulled a sneaky on him, and that sneaky got him resulting in the Delta getting absolutely riddled by Sundukbut bullets. Now, not the end of the world. With the Ghazi Matawiya down, he does have attack runs, and so various different pieces are going to end up moving up and around, including the roadbot, and they are going to succeed in putting the Sundukbut down. One of the things that happens here that's sort of quite relevant is that in order to see the delta when it jumped up, the Sundukbut had to make some line of sight compromises. It doesn't have 360 visor, and because I was very worried about like the gamma moving up and around here, which spoiler alert it would do, the Sundukbut kind of had to face in this direction. And because it had to face in this direction, the roadbot had a very clean line of attack on it, and although this all takes a bunch of orders, the roadbot is eventually able to get in, up and around, engage the Sundukbut. The Sundukbut makes a dodge, but the roadbot engages it inside good range, and after a little bit of back and forth that also results in the roadbot firing some Panzerfaust off at opportunistic things, the Sundukbut gets put down. Not dead, it's a remote presence trooper, it's hard to put all the way to dead, but the roadbot does put it down. Down the Sundukbut goes, and then the roadbot pulls back. The Gamma Trooper will use the few remaining orders that he has to get up on an ARO position, because Ed very correctly judges at this point that the Gamma Trooper is very difficult for me to deal with as an ARO piece. I can't fight it with a Zabek, Ballistic Attack -3 doesn't work on a Warhorse, I can't fight it with a Janissary, a HMG does not work on an Armor 6 Trooper, and so I basically just, the Gamma has right of way in this particular case, and he's able to position the Gamma up here thanks to the efforts of the Sasha, who, spending about 4 orders, does grab a Night gun out of the panoply and puts Megabeast to sleep. Now, it's at the beginning of my second turn that I realize a very serious exploit that is available inside this scenario's mechanics. Now, it is sufficiently unfun that it is something that I do not choose to avail myself of, but as a useful lesson learned for people who are thinking about doing scenarios themselves in future, if you put dangerous and independent ARO elements, things that interact automatically with the enemy, and especially something as dangerous as a Megabeast, which is doing a guard, burst 2, CC22, damage 3 or 4 DACCW weapon, do not have the scenario end in retreat, because what you have done by putting the Megabeast on the table in this case is given either player the option to virtually automatically end the game in retreat at any time. Had I wanted to this turn with the Megabeast was technically awake, but I could have asleep, but I could have woken it back up with a gunshot and just fed my entire army minus 74 points. I could have just fed my entire army into the Megabeast, leaving behind just enough to defend this position. Ed has lost troopers, he is down orders, we're both attriting down our forces as happens in a game of Infinity, and especially if I left behind 74 points, has to be 74 points of my cheapest stuff to defend this the extraction zone. With the remnants of Ed's forces, there is nothing he would have that would be able to push through and reclaim enough scenario points in that one turn he would have before the game ended in retreat. And given I had a couple of command tokens left at this point, there was also the serious risk that anything he was able to do I might be able to recover because I would have the last turn. Retreat is normally not an exploitable mechanic, because in 99% of cases the only way that a player can sustain enough casualties to enter the retreat state is by the active and meaningful efforts of their opponent, which their opponent can always choose not to enact. But in this case, I could have just fed everything into the maw of the Sarlacc and ended the game with a victory nearly on the spot. For emphasis, didn't do that, but I suggest playing this scenario as having no quarter. It just works much better that way. Now, noting that I was not going to feed my army into the belly of the beast, and also that I didn't really have any particular reason to aggress too heavily, I wanted to, as efficiently as possible, trim back some of Ed's options, But with this Gamma on ARO, my direct gunfighting options were shockingly limited. So instead, I went with the let's see how much we can pare back. Let's see how much I can deal with get in difficult positions to extract themselves from, and let's get that Sundukbut back up. So the Yan Yan is going to be the hero of this turn, and he's going to be doing the bulk of the effort. Basically, everyone else will just be pulling things out of the panoply because there's points to do that. It's the only way I can score points at this point because I have done everything else that I can with 3 objectives in the extraction zone from the first turn. And so after an awful lot of failed smoke grenade throws, what's going to happen is that there's a little opening under these stacked crates here. The Yan Yan's going to peek through there. We're going to eventually get some smoke down there and some smoke down there. We're going to land an auto repair kit, and the Yan Yan's going to zoop around here. He's going to pick the Sundukbut back up. He's going to scooch around here, and he's going to sneak through this position here, super jump across this gap into close combat with the Roadbot. The Yan Yan has drawn an explosive close combat weapon as his booty, and so the Roadbot is going to riot stop for him, and he's going to swing at the Roadbot. Now, in an ideal world, I can actually do a lot of damage to the Roadbot here, hopefully put it into no wounding cap. It's very hard to put them all the way to dead in one go. And look, the Yan Yan has a good fizz. Maybe he survives the riot stopper. Nope, he does not survive the riot stopper. He gets immobilized. He does do a wound to the Roadbot. It's only a damage 8 CCW because of how the booty charts work, but he's still alive, and it's fine. That is, however, otherwise going to be like that and putting more defenses in place, just getting people set up, getting people in suppressive fire, moving things like Layla Sharif and the Odalisk around. I'm able to have Layla Sharif jump up. There's a little platform up here that she can jump up to and go prone. She does that while the Megabeast is asleep, and that puts a 6 sense carbonite zone of control basically all the way around the objective in a difficult to position approach. And then, of course, the other thing that I will do this turn is that I will have a model shoot the Megabeast. That costs me 1 order, it wakes it back up at the end of my turn, and the Megabeast is just all advantage for me because I don't have to fight that thing, and if Ed wants to get anywhere near my objectives, he has to fight it itself. Again, what looks like a scenario mechanic that is probably meant to make it more difficult to aggressively pursue the scenario, actually very exploitable in order to defend an existing lead. We saw the same problem in the 3rd mission in the campaign. Now, going into his final turn, spoiler alert, what will be his final turn, in the strictest sense, that's kind of a good defensive turn for Ed. I've done basically no damage to his army. I have wounded the Roadbot. In the process, I have rendered immobilized the Yan Yan, and it's Ed's turn to go. However, there is a problem, and the problem is that I have not fielded a Sundukbut particularly often, and I, for some reason, seem to field it mostly against O12 players. And there is one particular model that my Sundukbut has a taste for blood with regards to. It will perform adequately against basically everything else in the game, usually statistically about what you'd expect. It's just a ballistic skill 13 trooper with no modifiers, but as soon as it has to engage a Gamma trooper, the doom music begins to play and the red mist descends, and that is tragically what occurs here. Ed, before he does anything else, does have to go through the whole goddamn rigmarole of putting the Megabeast back to sleep. It costs him 3 orders this turn, with the Sasha reloading and firing a couple of times because the Megabeast still dodges, but she does succeed. He has to do that because the Gamma Trooper is within 8 inches of the Megabeast, and it cannot activate till the Megabeast is put back down again. The Gamma then spools up and engages the Sundukbut, and at this point it's within 24 inches, and I want to say 5 orders later, the Gamma is dead and the Sundukbut is still alive on 1 wound. Now, look, that's basically a blowout for the turn. Ed does manage to do a little bit of maneuvering. He gets the Tactical Awareness Oko and Omega up and around here into position behind this rock, and that does put the Sundukbut back down. I'm not going to be able to recover it again. Good job, Omega Trooper, but that is so much damage in a turn. No forward progress is made. Ed's order pool is too aggressively attrited. He just doesn't have enough time left in the game. We go into my 3rd and final turn. The Megabeast is actually technically wounded because the Janissary, I think, shot it and actually inflicted some damage on it, but it doesn't matter. There's too many defenses in and around this position. There's a 6 sense hacker with Carbonite. There's multiple models in suppressive fire. Ed is down most of his pieces, and to go through the process of putting this beast back down to sleep again just does not leave him with enough orders to meaningfully pursue the game. So we shake hands there, and he taps out, and that ends the scenario with a very decisive 10-0 win to Haqqislam. And so that wraps up all 4 games of the Monday Signal. And with the campaign concluded, I thought I might just do some positive takeaways and lessons learned. about my experience through this campaign, and especially the things I like, but also if you want to do a narrative campaign yourself locally, it's a really fun way just to do things like spice up game nights, etc. How might you go about doing that? Now, positive cat takeaways first. The first thing and major positive takeaway for me was just how nice and easy it felt to just slide this into an existing game night structure. I play Infinity on Wednesday nights at the local game store. We usually have a good crowd that turns out, and of that crowd, over the course of the last month, there's been some people who wanted to just play the narrative, and so they turned up, and that was the game that they played that evening, and it just slipped in really easily. It added a little bit of novelty to weekly game nights. Usually we'll be doing things like, oh, what is the next upcoming event? We'll play a scenario from that, which means that we tend to play the same 3 or 5 scenarios like on rotation for a couple of months before shifting them out, and just having like, no, we're playing Raid the Khazaraibu this night. Anyone who wants to do event prep can 100% do that, but anyone who wants in on the narrative campaign has something else to play. And I liked how that worked, and in particular, I liked how that felt because the narrative campaign was a bit more tightly focused and a bit more structured than the really like full-scale global map campaigns like Wotan Crisis, etc., that CB has done in the past. It just generally felt a lot more comfortable. I have played in, I think, 3 of those global campaigns now, and they get sweaty to a point that actually kind of isn't fun. If you remember some of those, you get people who just grind out a truly extraordinary number of games to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, your number has really gone up, but by God, that can't be fun. How did you play 20 games in 4 weeks? Like, I don't want to play. I love Infinity, and I don't want to play 20 games of Infinity in a month. What are you doing? This was very easy to just slot into Wednesday night games, and it felt really good as a result. The 2 other things about the campaign that I really liked, and which admittedly are something that you can't necessarily do if you wanted to run one of these yourself, is the things that Corvus Belli added. The audio productions by 3D36 and Tabitha Miller were just really, like, they were short audio things, but they were really nice to listen to. You can still find all of them on Mission Geist, I believe. 3D36 provided the rave music. Tabitha Miller did the voiceover for Ruby Monday. That was just super cool, and it added that like personal and narrative hook and element into the campaign that made you sort of feel a little bit like what the story was going on and the characters, or I guess characters singular, and that's a nice addition that was like, this is what CB is doing that is adding to this, and this is what's kind of setting it apart from, I guess, usual Wednesday night games. And then finally, massive credit to Mission Geist. They have just emerged as one of the most useful tools for playing Infinity. I do not think this campaign would have been possible without them being involved. And so, absolutely enormous props. If you aren't using Mission Geist just for your regular games, you probably should be. It's incredibly awesome. Now, to accompany the positive takeaways, a few lessons learned I think that are most useful for people who want to do something like this themselves. Firstly, to talk about the most and least played scenarios. Mission 1 was the most played scenario locally. That was Raid the Khazaraibu by Loss of Lieutenant. Now, in part, it was the first scenario, it was the first mission in the campaign set, so it set the tone well, and we were going to have the most people basically always play that, because people who were interested in, oh, I want to see if I like this narrative campaign, they were going to test with Mission 1. If you are going to do a narrative campaign yourself, have Mission 1 be something that is fun and a hook. And I think, by and large, Loss of Lieutenant pretty much nailed that with Raid the Khazaraibu. Now, it was very random. Not just randomly moving mission objectives, but very random terrain elements that might have been slightly overwrought if we were doing ITS, but you can get away with a little bit of randomness in a narrative provided everyone knows what they're signing up for. Randomness is not inherently bad, provided it's at least nominally fair randomness. And actually, to kind of call something out that's interesting with Raid the Khazaraibu is that it manages to strike that tone, because every objective can only be activated during the game once, even though you will invariably have many games that play out like the one mine did, where on the first turn, one player just gets 2 objectives that are very easy for them to activate. That can feel quite mentally discouraging for the player who has to fight through that. Ultimately, it's a game of 2 halves, and the other objectives will flip and be activated by the other player at certain points during the game, so it does kind of rubber band a little bit. So don't be afraid of randomness in narrative missions too much. Don't overdo it. Judge based on your locals and what it is that they want, but don't be afraid of a bit more randomness in a narrative scenario, provided you can, if possible, make that randomness fair. Randomness that will ultimately affect both players equally over the course of the game is probably the best way to do it. In terms of least played scenario, Mission 3 was the least played scenario locally, and it's very clear why, because that one had 2 objective rooms required. Simple math was very strongly against us here. We have 3 objective rooms at the local game store. Normally, that will suffice to allow 6 people to play scenarios with objective rooms. In this case, it allowed for 2 because the leftover 1 was not enough. We could feasibly have done some things like taping out zones, but because this was just a turn up and play situation, and we weren't coordinating to that extent, it meant that only one table got to run Mission 3, and I had to have my game down the line on the weekend. Now, fortunately, that's a problem that is very easy to overcome if you want to run a narrative campaign locally, because you will know exactly what kind of terrain that you've got access to, and you can just make sure that everyone can play. If you do strange and interesting things with terrain, which in a narrative campaign is fine to do, especially if you give people advance notice so they can build for it. Again, to come back to scenario 1, everyone knew in advance there was going to be Eclipse templates all over the fucking place, and so they could build lists accordingly. Now, in practice, what I found was the game went from, ha ha ha, the bolts can see nothing, to, oh fuck, the bolts can see everything, I'm not prepared for this. That was a fun experience. You can get away with funky table setups if people know it's coming and can prepare for it in a narrative campaign. In this particular case, because the missions had to be one size fits all, Mission 3 stalled us out a little bit. We only had a few people playing Mission 4. And that sort of segues into the final significant lesson learned, and I think my advice for people who want to do narrative campaigns in future, and that is to really watch out for what I've taken to calling narrative over design, which is basically just, I had this cool and awesome idea, and I'm going to do a full and complicated mechanic to put that idea into the game. To the maximum extent possible, avoid that. If you think you've oversimplified your interesting idea, you probably haven't. The fundamental nature of complicated mechanics is that they are harder to test and easier to exploit, including exploit unintentionally, and I think missions 3 and 4 of the Monday Signal showcase this. Mission 3 in particular, with the deployment requirements and the fact that each combat group is locked into one of the 2 power pack sides, means that even if players aren't intending to exploit this, if they throw a punch at one of the combat groups in one of the deployment zones, they will win that flank almost automatically, because all of the orders that might be used to counterattack and punish an overextending piece are the pieces that are being generated by the pieces that our overextending piece is going to kill. And so by designing a mechanic that was meant to be this cool narrative thing where you would have 2 different strike teams that were outside mutual support and would each have an individual objective to pursue, entirely unintentionally, the designer for that one created an environment where any offensive action by either player invariably resulted in a much larger snowball than would exist in a normal game. Okay, so how do you deal with that? You just make your narrative missions mechanically simpler. Test each of them once if you can, check the victory conditions, and do not assume that the players are going to play the game in a way that matches up to the experience you think they're going to have. To an extent, this is almost like first-time DM syndrome. Anyone who has ever run a Dungeons & Dragons or role-playing game campaign, or been in a role-playing game run by someone running it for the first time, those are magical and wonderful experiences, but we have all had this experience where the DM has this big idea about how the game is going to go, and what happens instead is that the entire first session is spent in a bar talking to a goblin called Sam Snorkel, because that's what the players latched onto, and it was entirely separate and emergent from what you thought was going to happen. You had some big story in mind, and you set everything up for that, and the players just didn't do it because they never do. The simpler the mission objectives are, the simpler the mechanics are, and the more those mission objectives and mechanics play like a kind of loose and easy version of a normal game of Infinity, the more you allow emergent things to happen as a result of a small number of things you put into a narrative campaign to differentiate it. Frankly, if you want a rule of thumb, 1 or 2 things that makes a scenario different to a regular game of Infinity is probably about the right amount. Something weird with visibility control. Something weird with objectives, but like not big or significant. try and figure out what a simple story that the mission is telling is going to be, and then let the players add their spin on that rather than trying to curate the entire experience. So that's a lot of words to say. Basically, avoid overcomplicating narrative scenarios and avoid trying to straitjacket or railroad players into a particular story or experience. Instead, approach it like a D&D game where you set the preconditions, you set the events that surround the players, and then let the players make their own story within that. Raid the Kazaraibu, I think, did that quite well. My mission, frankly, was just an ITS mission with the serial numbers filed off, and I think it probably didn't do it enough. And then missions 3 and 4, to greater or lesser extents, suffered a little bit from that first-time Dungeon Master syndrome, and so really required the players to sort of agree not to exploit them like I had to do on turn 2 of my game with Ed today, but frankly which was utterly unavoidable due to the deployment conditions in Mission 3. Now, overall, did I have fun with the Monday Signal? Yes. This was fun to be a part of, it was fun to watch, it was fun to listen to the audio recordings on Mission Geist, and it was fun to hear people's feedback on my involvement. I hope you all enjoyed it as well, and I'd be very interested to hear your experiences about the narrative campaign and how it played out, if any stories emerged, like the one that I found I had emerged by using Layla Sharif in all 4 scenarios. That was just a fun little bit of emergent narrative that played into those vignettes at the beginning. What stories did you have emerge? Did you play the same or different factions each time? How did you approach it? And did you find anything weird in any of the scenarios that would be takeaways for you? If you were running a narrative campaign, how would you do it and what would you take away from the Monday Signal? Now, that wraps up the video for this week and concludes the Monday Signal campaign. We will be back in relatively short order, perhaps as early as this weekend with a particularly special video I'm hoping to record. But otherwise, or after that, we return to our regular schedule of about 1 video a week. Just as a reminder, hit like, hit subscribe, all of that YouTube stuff. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. If not, then I just hope as always that you've enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.